A couple people have asked me for the Mola costs for all of the units available in the hero selectors, because we've got fully deck selectors that give you plus 15 units with all of their skills enhanced, versus the normal ones that give you the usual plus 0. So this is meant to show you the Mola costs for the units in the hero selector. Do note that this isn't supposed to tell you which units to pick. This is sorted in order of the units in the tier list, but this is just supposed to show you their Mola costs, not which ones to pick. If you do want to know which ones to take, then you can look at this tier list video instead. And before anything else, looking at any Molas, make sure you're picking good units. And then you can pick the higher Mola cost units with the fully deck selector, like these 33 ones. And then pick the lower cost ones with the normal selector, like this one's only 6, this one's only 9. So stuff like that. Which is all sorted into, there's minimum and luxury, where minimum is, I would say, you at least want these Molas before using these units. And then luxury is only if you really like them or feel like you need it. And then if you can't recognize these names, there is a link in the description for the video that has a tier list with the names attached. And this is sorted in order of that tier list, so it's pretty easy to follow along. And then there is also Cecilia Bot. You can go to the Cecilia Bot website and search for the units' names there instead. This is the tier list in question. You can see all the units here. I'm only going to be covering from Assyria down to Vildred. There is the unavailable, the free, and the useless, which I won't be covering for various reasons. This one is because they're not really that useful. If you're picking these, you either already know what to do with these units because you've been playing for a while, or you just really like them, and in that case, if you don't know, then you can ask in the Discord. We'll all be happy to help there. Free units, it's not too important because they're not in the selector, and then these are unavailable. I might eventually expand this to cover all units, but for now it's just the ones in the selector. So first up, we can look at Assyria. Assyria, debuffer, not a DPS, so we're just looking for the 1 turn on her S2 and the 1 turn on her S3. S1 Molas are nice because they give you the extra death rate chance. And she does have the usual 10 cost soul burn on her S1, but she's got a pretty unique case where instead of increasing it to 100% like just about every other unit with the 10 cost soul burn on their S1 for increasing effect chance, it only increases by 50, so without +4 in her S1, you won't have a 100% chance of death break. But you can still live without S1 Molas if you want to save on them, or at least wait for Friendship 10, because she has the 100% death break on her S3, and she cycles relatively quickly. There's also Paulus, who has 2 builds. There's the tank build, which is for slower players. This is just tank with F, and you on Abyssal Crown, so you only need the effect chance Molas, because she's just played the debuff people, stunned them blind, unbuffable. And there's DPS Paulus for cleavers. Plus 15, because all of her damage can be important. Sometimes you're soul burning her S1 to focus somebody down. So you do need her S1 Molas too. There's Knockwool, really good debuffer, but they made her a pretty Mola cheap unit because she doesn't have that many effect chances in her kit. Her S2 has none, and her S3 has none, so it's just the -1 turn on her S3, and then the silence chance on her S1. So I'd say she's pretty much a prime candidate for the normal selector because her Mola costs are so low. And then there is Celine, DPS unit, so plus 15. Rowana, we use her for her S2, so you definitely want to max this. And then her S3 cooldown can be useful in longer fights. I wouldn't say it's super important, so you might want to wait for Friendship 10 for this. And there's Ravi, a bruiser who does damage, so also a plus 15 unit, 33 Mola cost. There is Bologna, the PV unit. So we're mainly looking at the death break chance on her S3, which is 6 Molas, and anything after that kind of just depends how you're using her. If you're looking for more damage for Rift, then you can Mola her S2 and S3. S1's not that important in this case. If you're using her for Banshee 13 one-shot, which isn't that high priority of content now that Rift exists, then you can focus her S1 instead. And then there's Arya, also a damage-dealing bruiser, so plus 15. If you're using her for Wyvern 13 one-shot, she doesn't really need any Molas for that, but mostly just an arena unit. And then there is Elena, who we also use for her S2, so similar to Rana, you want to max that. And then her S3 cooldown, if you're in a really long fight it might come in handy. This is something you could wait for Friendship 10 for, or just get it out of the way if you want to use her in PvP now. Rand, damage dealer, so plus 33. Payra is a debuffer, but she's got a lot of useful enhances compared to Knockwool. So you want the barrier strength on her S3 maxed out, the -1 turn on her S2 because she cycles pretty fast, and then you also want the stun chance on her S1 because Payra stuns are very annoying. Fumir, effect chances on her S2, and -1 turn on her S3. Araminta's got the -1 turn on her S2 and effect chances on her S3. And then Luxury is the burn chance on her S1. Testina, you want to at least get the -1 turn on her S3, and then anything after that is for healing. She's a little bit different because her S2 and S3 are most of where her healing comes from, so those would be the main ones. And then if you feel like you're in the situation a lot, or if she ever rotates back into meta, the super long tank down metas, then her S1 enhances do help out with her Soulburn S1 healing, so that could be a thing, but mostly focus S1, S3, or S2 and S3, and S1 is last. And then there's Ray, similar thing, the -1 turn on his S3, and then any other enhances are just for heal or shield, but it's probably not necessary, especially since he's just a PvE unit. And then there is Shu, who's mostly just used for Nightmare Carcass at this point, though she is a decent pocket pick for RTA, or at least she was last season. So if you're just using her for PvE, you don't really need any Molas. And then if you're using her for PvP, then she's plus 15. Then there is Elvira, mostly just used as a counter for Abyssal Euphine in Arena. So for Arena, you can just do her -1 turn on S3, so she has less dead turns, where she doesn't have Immortality. And she does have some other Molas that seem useful, but the way she gets used in Arena, and from my experience using her, I don't ever feel like her effector matters that much, honestly, so you could get away without the S2 Molas, and I'd say these are luxury. And then there are her S1 Molas, which have Provoke Chance, which sound like something you'd want to enhance, but the Provoke also, in practice, doesn't really feel that useful to me. Next up, there's Lua, who you want to give Mola her S2 for the -1 turn. And then S1 is up to you. It's 10% Death Break chance total for 7 Molas. And Death Break can be kind of annoying, but really up to you if you want to spend the Molas or not. And then there is Flan, who is just a cleave unit and will be questionably useful after Heart City comes out, but she works at +0. You don't really need to Mola her. But if you do want the extra CR push, then you can max out her S2. Her S3 has -1 turn, but as a cleave unit, if you are S3ing twice, something has gone horribly wrong, so you don't really need to Mola that. Leica, the way she gets used, her CR push on S1 isn't really that useful, because you wouldn't be using the EE that lets you target the high attack ally, so it's just a random CR push, not that necessary. You'd want the effect chances on her S2 and her S3 though. Hua Young only really used to nuke somebody with her S3, so it's just her S3, and anything else is luxury. S1 gives you bonus damage. It doesn't apply to her extra damage proc, but it is still damage. And then S2 is a bit more damage reduction, so super luxury there. Then there's Abigail. Depending on how you're using her, if she's just the bot for her S2, you don't need to Mola anything, and if you're running her as a bruiser for fun, then you want to Mola her S1 and S3 for damage. Ida, niche cleave unit, but her S2 and S3 are her main burst combo, so these do want to be maxed. And then the luxury is her S1, because yes, she is still a DPS unit, and on her second turn, well, since her S2 and S3 get used in pretty much one turn with the extra turn soul burn, on her second turn she would S1, and sometimes it might matter, but generally just S2, S3 is fine. Then there's Lilius. If you're using her just as a tank or for PvE, her Molas aren't really that important. If you're using her as a bruiser, then S1 and S3 are nice for the damage. S2 is just barrier strength, so this would just be not that important, because I had to actually check what her S2 Molas were. So barrier strength I don't think is that important. Maybe if you're using her as a tank you end up wanting it, but I'd say it's just skippable. Euphine, her main usage is for Euphi Lab, where she only needs S1, so it's just +5 on her S1. She is usable in Banshee 13 one-shot, which is again low priority content, but there's a lot of better options anyways, like Galilius or Bologna, so you're probably not going to be using her there. There's Ball and Sezin, who you just want the effect chances on his S3, and anything else is just luxury because he's a PV unit, so it's not really necessary. Ken works without any molas for Wyvern 13 one-shot, which is low priority content, and anything else is super luxury. You can just wait for Friendship 10 if you want. His S3 has -1 turn, and his S1 gives him a bit more fighting spirit when he uses S1. Valencia, probably just a niche Guild War unit. She is a damage dealing bruiser, so she would be +33. And then there's Vildred, who does need the very important note that he is in the speed imprint for cleavers tier list, so generally he's not really a unit that you would be picking from a selector unless you're looking for imprints, but I'll put him here anyways because he's still a useful unit. He needs imprints to be effective for his team speed imprint. I'd say at least S imprint to be usable. His S1 molas are useful if you're running him with Wanderer Silk because her S2 brings the highest attack ally for a dual attack, and also for securing kills on Holy Sack units, especially with Wind Rider. But for the most part, his S3 wipe into S2 follow-up combo are the main thing. And then, like I mentioned, you can mola his S1 to complete his damage if you want. So that is the full list for what I consider useful selector units. This was something that I was hoping would work, but it's a little bit scuffed. You could download a copy and delete these top 2 rows instead, but you can try sorting this from A to Z, and this is not working. Let us select this row and sort this from A to Z, or sort it from Z to A, and this would float the higher Mola cost units at the top. So again, don't just pick by Mola costs, make sure you're picking good units. One way you could do this is if you are planning on only picking, if you already know what you're picking, you could delete all the units that you're not picking and then just sort it and just view it like this instead. But hopefully this helped anybody who wanted to know the Mola cost for some of these units.